Regardless of whether you're enjoying Anthem or not, I think you'd have to be in complete denial to not recognize that the game does have its fair share of major issues. One of its biggest problems currently is the endgame, which not only lacks the content necessary to keep players hooked for weeks and months on end, but is also plagued by fundamental design choices that completely mar the experience. It's not just players who have chimed in on the matter. One developer decided to take to Reddit to highlight Anthem's issues while providing some ideas and advice. This Reddit thread was posted by none other than Travis Day, who, for those who don't know, was a lead designer for Diablo 3 before he left Blizzard on July 2018. Now, you may recall how rough and utterly broken Diablo 3 was at launch, calling for a complete top-to-bottom overhaul of its loot system to bring it back up to an adequate state, an overhaul dubbed Loot 2.0. Well, interesting to note is that Travis Day played a major role in fixing Diablo 3 and lifting the stumbling game back on its feet, so if there's anyone who can provide valuable feedback regarding Anthem's less-than-ideal reward system and structure, it's him. I'd like to emphasize that Travis's post here wasn't intended to throw shade at Bioware developers or anything like that. If you read the post yourself, you'll see that Travis's tone is amicable yet direct about problems he faced while playing the game, and all he's trying to do is provide genuine and honest advice about how to improve the conceptually compelling but inherently flawed title. The stuff he talked about here is pretty on point at that, and you can see how many players agree with these sentiments, judging by how this thread has already garnered 7,500 upvotes. There are 5 major bullet points that Travis goes through in this post, starting with what he called dead inscriptions. One of the biggest complaints about Anthem's loot is that they will often roll stats that are completely useless for the weapon at hand. So as an example, you might earn a piece of gear that's elemental in nature, but grants you additional physical damage, or vice versa, making that inscription a complete waste of space. Travis pointed out that while it's not uncommon for looter games to feature items with stats of varying degrees of statistical optimization, it's one thing to have a weapon whose stats are bad versus stats that literally are useless and do not work. Fortunately, this is one issue that Bioware has already taken steps to fix with a recent update that fixes the way inscriptions work. In the patch notes, the studio provided the example of how the system's been changed so that, say, an assault rifle will not have an item-specific inscription like increased pistol damage that will be completely useless, though it might get a boost in electric damage that applies to not just the weapon but the javelin as a whole, allowing players to use it for builds that focus on lightning attacks and such. The general consensus is that this is definitely a step in the right direction, though there is still much work to be done to ensure loot feels satisfying to earn throughout the endgame. Next up, Travis talked about how off-kilter Anthem's risk versus reward balance is, something he admitted can be a common pitfall for games of the looter variety, including ones he's worked on. The specific point he made here concerned the 3 strongholds the game released with, Tyrant Mine, Temple of Scar, and Heart of Rage, which are listed in their order of difficulty. It was pointed out how in the most difficult stronghold, Heart of Rage, it took Travis 30 minutes to kill the boss, whereas the boss in the easiest stronghold, Tyrant Mine, took him way less, evoking a sense of disproportionality. Now, the variation in difficulty for each of these strongholds would work if the reward players earn scaled to the effort required to beat them, but the way Anthem currently works right now is that regardless of whether you tackle Tyrant Mine, Temple of Scar, or Heart of Rage, you'll pretty much get the same or similar level of rewards. This segues right into his third bullet point, which is the lack of incentive to tackle random strongholds. As Anthem currently stands, there is absolutely no reason to play the significantly more difficult and more time-consuming Heart of Rage stronghold over the much less difficult and much less time-consuming Tyrant Mine, and with players' tendency to follow the path of least resistance for the most gain, all players will do is run Tyrant Mine over and over and over again to grind for loot and whatnot. Travis was also blunt about the ramifications this will have when it comes to Anthem's lasting appeal and long-term viability, stating, quote, "This also increases the speed at which players will burn out, since the game feels shallow and lacks variety. There is a lot to be said for diversity of combat environments and situations. While I personally am enjoying trying to optimize my path through Tyrant Mines, it is certainly making me bore of the somewhat limited content that is available. Indeed, the lack of variety of missions, combat scenarios, and environments has been one of the biggest points of criticism against Anthem, as it makes the game boring to play both through the campaign and through the endgame. To mitigate endgame burnout, the solution that Travis proposed was to either even out the difficulty of all 3 strongholds so that players will choose which one to tackle based on personal preference, or to make it so that rewards match the difficulty of each respective stronghold. Another interesting idea he threw out there was to add random strongholds to available mission queues while attaching special incentives for these, like luck/magic find bonus. All around, giving players any reason to engage in a variety of activities rather than just repeat Tyrant Mine over and over again will go a long way. Now, unlike the removal of dead inscriptions, the unbalanced risk-to-reward ratio and the lack of incentive to partake in a variety of strongholds are both aspects that have not been fixed yet, though BioWare is aware of the problem and they have expressed intentions to resolve it down the line. Moving on, the 4th bullet point Travis brought up was about targeted farming. Basically, he pointed out how Anthem currently lacks a more comprehensive degree of control for players to be able to farm specific items by undertaking certain activities. He did compliment how players can tackle strongholds knowing it will drop a Masterwork skill, and tackle legendary contracts knowing those will drop Masterwork class mods, noting how players can set goals for themselves that way and pursue said goals by tackling a variety of associated activities. Unfortunately, Anthem isn't all there in that regard, with a specific example Travis provided being that when it comes to legendary contracts, due to the fact that there's a limited number of them per day, there is no way to explicitly farm desired item types that specific activity variety yields. Once all the legendary contracts have been tackled, players will essentially have to resort to monotonous dungeon farming again in the hopes that they'll randomly get a desired item with a diminished degree of control. In summary, Travis said this: "Personally, I like the idea of leaning into different activities guaranteeing me different item slots. The only real problem here is that I can't make that choice every time I enter a queue. Skills are covered by dungeons, components have limited coverage based on players' inability to chain queue them, and weapons have no activity directly offering them." Last but not least, for his 5th bullet point, Travis discussed the stark jump between the game's various difficulty settings, particularly where Grandmaster is concerned. Basically, there's simply far too big of a disparity between Grandmaster 1 difficulty and Grandmaster 2. While it was noted Anthem does a good job of smoothly transitioning players from hard into Grandmaster 1, with the introduction of Masterwork weapons providing a steady power surge that will eventually culminate in Grandmaster 1 becoming trivial, the same couldn't be said for the transition between Grandmaster 1 and Grandmaster 2, with Travis and many other people feeling as though the difficulty jump was way too much. Enemies became too hard and bullet spongy to kill, while players became too fragile, and it made Grandmaster 2 feel like it just isn't worth the time and energy pursuing. The solution Travis proposed was that Grandmaster 2 and 3 should be tuned, or that additional intermediate difficulty should be added in between to smooth out the transition, while advising that it's important games don't push players into thinking they have to tackle impossibly hard tasks because they're being over-rewarded. The post finally concluded with Travis expressing that the intention of this post is to contribute to the betterment of Anthem, with the hopes that this will all ultimately spark a positive conversation. Basically, he's making it known that he harbors no ill will, and that this is him respectfully but bluntly sharing his thoughts, because he genuinely wants to see this game improve. Travis definitely nailed in the head every single one of his points, and I'd expect nothing less from the guy who played such a key part in undoing the mess that was Diablo 3's initially broken loot system. BioWare would definitely do well to listen to the advice he has to offer, and fortunately it does look like the studio has already acknowledged that they're taking the contents of this post into account. BioWare's development manager responded with the following statement: "Hey Travis, thanks a ton for taking the time to write this feedback. I really appreciate the unique insight. I've passed it along already in case others on the team haven't seen it already. Love your work, huge fan." It really is fantastic to see this level of positive and constructive communication, and while BioWare has their work cut out for them, the studio has actively been keen on keeping their eyes and ears open for any valuable feedback, which is a good attitude to have moving forward. Granted, it still baffles me that BioWare could make such fatal and fundamental mistakes in the construction of their shooter-looter. Much of the advice Travis provided isn't really rocket science. I feel like it's common sense that's been applied to plenty of other looters in the past, ones that are decades old at that. Don't allow players to roll dead stats on items, make sure rewards scale to difficulty, make sure there's incentive for players to tackle a variety of activities, make sure difficulty levels transition smoothly. None of this stuff feels like it truly needs to be said when you're making a looter, given these are the core pillars of any looter. I get that when it comes to game development, it's often easier said than done, but in the case of Anthem, it just feels like BioWare couldn't get the most basic of things right, and it's mind-boggling that such rudimentary flaws with the game's design weren't spotted and fixed before launch. I honestly can't tell if this can be attributed to the studio's lack of know-how when it comes to looters, if a troubled development cycle resulted in BioWare having to rush out a product that clearly needed more testing and more time in the oven, or if we're looking at a combination of both. There are reports suggesting that throughout 2014 and 2015, Anthem's development was not going well, in large part due to technical issues surrounding the Frostbite engine, and it wasn't until the final few years that the project started to kick into full gear and come together. So that might have played a role in the lackluster state Anthem launched in. Now, I'm sure the game will be much better months or a year down the line, but as I've previously expressed, first impressions really do matter. People didn't buy a product now so they could play an adequate version of it later, and with new competitors in the shared world looter genre looming on the horizon, Anthem may have irreparably crippled its momentum by launching the way it did. For those willing to stick around though, feedback like what Travis offered is invaluable, and BioWare's intent on listening and responding does inspire some confidence, and it does seem to indicate that Anthem is far from a hopeless case, and that there might eventually be a worthwhile game here for those who are willing to wait. These are one man's thoughts and opinions anyway. I'd love to hear what your take is on Travis's feedback and Anthem's future prospects in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.